Michael had heard the rumors. Everyone in town had. There was a road that wasn't on any map. A forgotten stretch of tarmac that no one dared to drive down. A road that, on some nights, appeared out of nowhere, only to vanish before the first light of dawn. He'd always brushed it off. Just another old ghost story meant to scare the kids, he thought. Until one evening, when the air was thick with mist, and the moon was little more than a sliver in the sky. He saw it. The road. It wasn't there one moment, and then it was, the asphalt gleaming wet in the moonlight, leading into the trees like some forgotten path. It stretched far beyond what he could see, and somehow, it felt like it was waiting for him. Michael pulled over, his curiosity growing stronger than any warning in his head. No cars. No signs. Just the road. He stepped out of his car, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. There was no sound. Not even the usual hum of crickets or the distant rustling of leaves. The mist swirled around him, obscuring the view ahead. But Michael couldn't stop himself. He walked forward. The road seemed endless, stretching further and further into the unknown. It wound through trees that seemed older than anything he'd seen, their gnarled branches reaching down like twisted hands. The deeper he walked, the darker it became. At one point, he thought he saw something in the distance, movement. A flicker of light. Curious, he quickened his pace. The light grew brighter. Then, he saw it. A house. It stood at the edge of the road, illuminated by a soft, unnatural glow. An old, crumbling farmhouse with shattered windows and a porch that sagged with age. There was something wrong about it. The air felt thick, as though it were holding its breath. Michael stood there, just staring at it. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the hairs on his neck standing up. Then he heard it, a faint, whispering sound. Soft at first, but growing louder, like the rustling of paper. Then, from the shadows of the porch, he saw a figure. A woman. Her face was pale, almost ghostly. Her eyes were wide, locked on him. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. It was then that Michael realized. She wasn't speaking. She was mouthing words, desperately trying to communicate. "Leave," she whispered silently, her lips barely moving. "Leave before they find you." Suddenly, Michael felt a chill down his spine. The mist around him thickened, swirling faster, almost as if it were alive. He turned to run but found his feet frozen in place. The road, it was changing. It wasn't leading back to his car. It was twisting, bending in impossible ways, like something out of a nightmare. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his mouth. The woman's face faded into the darkness. The road stretched on, endless and suffocating. The whispers grew louder, the trees closing in around him. And then, silence. The next morning, the sun rose to an empty road. Michael's car was still parked on the side of the highway, but he was gone. They never found him. And no one spoke of the forgotten road after that night. But every so often, someone passing through that stretch of highway swears they see it. A road that's there one moment, and gone the next. Leading to a place from which no one returns. The old library. The library was the last place Theo ever expected to find a secret. He had always been a bookworm, spending his weekends wandering the aisles of his small town's old library. It was a quiet place, tucked away on a side street, with dust settling on the shelves and the smell of old paper filling the air. A sanctuary for anyone who liked to read. One rainy afternoon, when the library was nearly empty, Theo found something strange. He had been skimming the shelves in the back corner, where the oldest books were stored, when his fingers brushed against a book that didn't quite belong. It was tucked between two thick volumes, but it looked different. The cover was worn, almost like it had been handled too many times, though there was no title on it. Curious, he pulled it from the shelf. The spine cracked when he opened it, as though it hadn't been touched in years. The pages inside were yellowed, the ink faded in places, but the words seemed to leap off the page. It was a story about a man who found an old book in a library, just like he had. Theo chuckled at the coincidence, thinking it was some kind of odd fiction. But the more he read, the more he realized that the book wasn't just a story. It was a warning. It described in vivid detail how the book could drive a person mad. How anyone who read it would be drawn into its world, unable to escape the haunting whispers that came from the pages. Theo tried to stop reading, but the words were like a magnet, pulling him back in. He couldn't put the book down. The next few nights were filled with nightmares. Dark, shadowy figures with twisted faces seemed to lurk in the corners of his room. He could hear soft whispers, too faint to understand, coming from the walls. The more he read, the more real the whispers became. One night, after a particularly disturbing dream, Theo woke up in a cold sweat. He glanced at the book on his desk. It was open. The pages were turned to a new chapter, one he hadn't read before. The words seemed to shimmer in the dim light of his room. "They are waiting for you." Theo slammed the book shut, trying to ignore the panic rising in his chest. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The next day, Theo returned the book to the library, hoping it would stop the nightmares, the whispers. But when he reached the shelf where he had found it, the space was empty. He looked around, confused. There was no sign of the book, no trace of its existence. That night, the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't coming from the walls. They were coming from inside his head. Theo tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. He was paralyzed, trapped in his own room, unable to move as the whispers grew louder. Closer. "You should have never opened it," the voice hissed, echoing in his mind. In the morning, Theo was gone. No one knew what happened to him. The library was searched, but the book was never found. And to this day, no one dares to wander too far into the back corner of the library. Because some stories, once opened, never end. Room 103. Jackson was just looking for a place to rest. A single night. On his way cross-country. He pulled off the highway, exhausted, and checked into a small, faded motel. The clerk didn't even look up, just slid a key across the counter. Room 103. Jackson noticed something odd. Every other key on the wall behind the clerk was gone. Only one left, room 103. The hallway smelled of mildew. And there was an eerie quietness that filled the air. Old carpet. Flickering lights. No sound except for his footsteps. Room 103 was at the far end of the hall. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was simple. A bed, a small table, and an old mirror. Not a wall mirror. This one was freestanding. Victorian style, with a heavy wooden frame. It stood in the corner, facing the bed. Jackson didn't like that. He turned the mirror around to face the wall. Then dropped his bags and laid down, trying to sleep. But at 1:17 a.m., he woke to a soft scraping sound. Like something shifting. The mirror. It was facing him again. Confused, he sat up. He looked around. Nothing. Everything was as it should be. He stood up. Turned the mirror back around. Checked the lock on the door. Then slid the desk in front of it for extra security. And went back to bed. At 3:03 a.m., he woke again. Cold sweat, a strange feeling creeping up his spine. The mirror was closer now. Just a few feet from the bed. Staring directly at him. But there was something else. A shape. In the reflection. There was a figure standing behind him in the bed. Jackson turned quickly. Nothing. The room was empty. But in the mirror, the figure remained. Staring, unmoving. It smiled. Slowly. It raised one finger to its lips. Shoo. Then the lights flickered and went out. In the morning, the maid knocked on the door. No answer. She opened it. Room 103 was empty. No suitcase, no clothes, no signs of anyone ever staying there. except the mirror. It now stood in the middle of the room, facing the door, and in its reflection, just for a moment, a man screaming. The music box. Olivia found it at a yard sale. A small porcelain music box, painted soft pink, with a tiny ballerina inside that spun when you turned the brass key. It played a melody no one could quite place. Something delicate and strangely familiar. She begged her mother to buy it. The old woman at the stall hesitated, then leaned in and said softly, "Just don't play it too much. It remembers who listens." That night, Olivia played it over and over again, until the tune echoed through the house like a lullaby with no end. On the second night, her mother found her standing in the hallway, sleepwalking, eyes open, humming that strange little song. On the third night, the box began playing by itself. The lid was closed, but the music was still playing. Her mother, Claire, tried to throw it away. She tossed it in the trash outside and slammed the lid. But at 3:03 a.m., she woke to the music again, coming from the kitchen. The box was back, open, spinning, and Olivia sat in front of it, still, silent, smiling. Claire stepped closer. Olivia turned her head, slowly, and whispered, "She wants to dance with someone new." The next morning, Claire was gone. And inside the music box, there were now two dancers. The ballerina, and a second figure, with brown painted hair, hands raised like she was screaming. Some songs don't end. They just wait for someone else to listen. If you liked it, please leave a like and or subscribe. Thank you.